Tonight, we step into the shadowed corridors of Middle-earth's ancient past, a place where the Witch-King of Angmar and his haunting Ringwraiths still linger. This is a tale woven from fear, power, and the slow, inevitable corruption that follows in the footsteps of darkness. A tale of how even the noblest souls may be twisted beyond recognition. The Witch-King, leader of the Nazgûl, the 9 servants of the Dark Lord, is the very essence of dread. I remember vividly the first time I saw them. Their silence, their presence, it wasn't the kind of fear that makes you scream. It was quieter, colder. A shadow that settles deep in your bones. Since then, they've come to represent something I deeply admire in dark fantasy: the beauty and horror of the unknown. Together, we'll trace the legacy of the Witch-King. Who was he truly? How did he rise to such terrible power? And what fate awaited him in the end? Later, I'll read passages from Tolkien's works, scenes in which the Witch-King and his wraiths emerge from the mists of myth. Their voices, their darkness, their downfall. So draw close. Let the firelight banish the chill. There is much to uncover. And as always, we'll explore it side by side, with clear eyes, bold hearts, and just the right spark of curiosity. If you'd like to support this humble journey to Mordor, consider joining me on Patreon. A little lembas bread for the road goes a long way. Now, find a place of warmth and comfort, perhaps your favorite chair by the fire, or a quiet corner beneath the night sky. We begin. Whether you're a seasoned traveler of Middle-earth or setting foot into its wonders for the first time, tonight we form a fellowship of our own. Together, we'll tread the paths once walked, and sometimes quietly hidden upon, by Frodo and his companions, ever shadowed by the silent pursuit of the Nazgûl. So settle in, perhaps with a warm cup of tea, or something stronger. Let the burdens of the day drift away. Close your eyes, if you wish, and let the soft glow of the fire, and the steady rhythm of my voice lead you. Let your thoughts wander, to the ancient lands of Middle-earth. Picture the windswept plains of Rohan, the towering peaks of the misty mountains, the tangled, brooding depths of Mirkwood. It was in these lands that the Ringwraiths once roamed, silent, relentless, without mercy. Now imagine, you are beside Frodo and the other hobbits, huddled within a small, dimly lit room. Strider watches over you, his gaze ever fixed on the darkness beyond. The only light comes from the slow-burning ember of his pipe. Outside, the wind moans through the trees. Their limbs creak like old bones, scraping against the windows, twisted branches reaching like the fingers of wraiths in search of prey. The world beyond must have felt distant, unreal, as if time itself had paused. Yet even in that shadowed stillness, with Strider at their side, there remained a flicker of hope. However faint, it was enough. You feel the earth beneath your feet as you move quietly through the underbrush, mirroring Strider's every step. Together, you follow the faintest signs, a broken twig here, a lone footprint there. The hobbits are just ahead, hiding, always hiding, from the Black Riders. You hear the soft rustle of leaves, the distant thud of hooves upon damp soil, the whisper of a hidden stream. The tension hangs in the air like mist. The Nazgûl could be anywhere, waiting, watching. And now, fully immersed, we begin. May the light of Erendel's star guide us, as we venture into the shadows of Middle-earth. Our story begins long before Sauron rose to his terrible height. In an age when Middle-earth was young, still untouched by the deep shadow yet to come. It was a time of wonder and radiant beauty. The elves, the firstborn of eerie, the creator of all that is, dwelt in harmony with the world. Their cities shimmered with the light of the two trees, the sacred sources that lit the world before the sun and moon ever graced the sky. In those days, the Vala, mighty beings sent by the Creator to shape and guard the world, walked openly among the lands. Under their guidance, the elves became masters of many arts. Their skill in craft was unequaled, metal, gem, and wood shaped with such grace that their creations seemed to breathe with life. And among these gifted souls, there was one who stood apart. Celebrimbor, grandson of Fëanor. Now Fëanor, as many will recall, was the greatest of all elven smiths. His genius was unmatched, but so too was his pride. And from that pride, a legacy of sorrow was born. Celebrimbor, however, was different. Though he inherited his grandfather's extraordinary gift, his spirit was gentler, his heart purer. He did not seek glory or dominion. He longed instead to preserve the beauty of the world, to protect what was fading from time's slow, inevitable hand. For though the elves are immortal, they feel the passing of ages keenly. They watched as the world changed around them, forests thinning, cities crumbling, the very land shifting beneath the weight of time. And so, Celebrimbor and his kin in the realm of Eregion set out to accomplish something wondrous. They would forge the rings of power. These were no mere trinkets. They were envisioned as vessels of preservation, a way to hold back decay, to keep Middle-earth ever bright, ever beautiful. But as is so often the case with great hopes, things did not unfold as planned. Even as the elves toiled with noble purpose, another figure moved in shadow. Sauron, the lieutenant of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, had not been idle. His desire was domination, and his will was bent on binding all of Middle-earth under his rule. To achieve this, he took on a fair guise and a gentle name, LOTR, the Lord of Gifts. He came to the elves of Eregion cloaked in wisdom and humility. He spoke of harmony and growth, of forging marvels that would endure for all time. His voice was smooth, his manner sincere. And to the elves, driven by hope and purpose, he seemed a kindred spirit. Celebrimbor and his people welcomed him, eager to learn, eager to create. Unaware, they opened their hearts, and their forges, to the architect of their ruin. Under LOTR's guidance, they worked tirelessly. Together, they shaped the rings of power, gleaming symbols of elven craft and aspiration. But all the while, beneath every word, behind every gesture, Sauron's true design unfolded in silence. And at last, after long years of tireless labor, the rings were complete. 19 in all, each a marvel of craft and enchantment. Their beauty was unparalleled, their magic deep and mysterious. But even as the elves gazed upon their creation with pride, they did not yet grasp the depth of the betrayal they had suffered. For while they toiled in Eregion, Sauron, hidden in plain sight, had forged a ring of his own. Alone, in the fires of Mount Doom, he shaped it. A single ring to master the others. The One Ring. When Sauron placed the ring upon his finger, the elves felt it at once. It was as though a shadow reached for their minds, a terrible force seeking dominion over their thoughts, their wills. Too late, they understood. They had been deceived. In haste, they hid their rings, desperate to keep them beyond Sauron's reach. But the damage was done. The rings were tainted, forever bound to the One Ring, and to Sauron's will. The 19 rings of power were soon divided among 3 races. 3 were given to the elven kings beneath the sky, 7 to the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, and 9 to mortal men doomed to die. Each ring was imbued with powers that reflected the hearts of those destined to wear them, each a temptation wrapped in splendor. The 3 elven rings, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, were the purest of all. Crafted apart from Sauron's hand, they held the power to heal, to protect, and to preserve what was good in the world. Narya, the Ring of Fire, inspired courage and rekindled hope in the hearts of those who stood against the dark. Nenya, the Ring of Water, was bound to the secret places of the natural world, guarding beauty from decay. Vilya, the Ring of Air, was the mightiest. Its power could shield and mend, ward off evil, and sustain what was fading. These three were entrusted to the wisest and most noble of the elves, Galadriel, Elrond, and Círdan. But even they dared not wield them openly, for as long as Sauron held the One Ring, he could perceive their use. Their thoughts were vulnerable, they were no longer entirely their own. The Seven and the Nine, however, were different. These rings had been shaped with Sauron's direct influence, guided by his whispered lies and hidden intent. And so they bore his mark more deeply. The Seven were gifted to the dwarf lords, masters of the 7 great houses of stone and fire. The 7 rings were intended to bring prosperity to their bearers, amplifying the dwarves' natural gifts for mining, crafting, and shaping the wealth of the earth. And for a time, they succeeded. The dwarf lords who bore these rings amassed treasures beyond imagination. Their vaults overflowed. Their kingdoms glittered with gold, silver, and precious stone. But the true power of the rings was never so simple, nor so kind. Though the dwarves proved resistant to Sauron's direct control, thanks to their unyielding nature and ancient resilience, their downfall came in another form: greed. The rings fed their desires, kindled a fire within their hearts that no treasure could quench. Wealth became obsession. They delved ever deeper into the earth, chasing riches with reckless hunger. And in their pursuit, they awakened things that should have remained undisturbed, forgotten powers sleeping in the dark places of the world. Many of their great kingdoms fell, not by sword or siege, but by the weight of their own desire. The 9 rings, however, were given to men, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of immense power and ambition. At first, they too flourished. The rings extended their lives, granting them strength beyond mortal measure. Their wisdom deepened. Their rule became absolute. Their people revered them as demigods. But the gift was a curse. The rings eroded their wills, slowly unraveling their hearts and minds. Over years, decades, centuries, they lost themselves to the darkness that clung to each golden band. Their bodies withered. Their spirits thinned. Until, at last, they became something less than men. They became wraiths. Bound in shadow. Bound to Sauron. Bound to the One Ring. These were the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths. No longer kings. No longer human. Only pale reflections of who they once were, wandering between worlds, enslaved to the Dark Lord's will. Let us linger for a moment on that transformation. The fragility of men is a theme that echoes throughout Tolkien's legendarium. And it's easy to see why. Unlike elves, ageless and serene, or dwarves, enduring and steadfast, men are mortal. Their lives are fleeting. Their futures uncertain. It is this very mortality, this fear of the unknown, that makes them vulnerable, susceptible to the promise of power, to the seduction of immortality. And the rings of power offered that promise in abundance. But the change was not sudden. The corruption was slow, insidious. At first, they reaped only blessings. Their kingdoms thrived. Their enemies bowed. Their names were sung in awe. But beneath that glory, the rings whispered, feeding on doubt, on pride, on fear. And by the time they sensed the shadow closing in, it was already too late. But as the years wore on, the true nature of the rings revealed itself. The bearers of the 9 began to dream, dark, vivid dreams filled with shadowed figures and lands veiled in night. In the stillness, whispers crept into their thoughts, soft voices speaking of power and glory, but laced with fear and dripping with despair. They found themselves drawn to these visions, entangled in their own hunger for greatness. Their ambitions deepened, warped into obsession. They would do anything, to see their desires fulfilled, even if it meant abandoning all that once made them noble. Morality, mercy, even their humanity, all fell away. Over time, the world of the living became a place they no longer understood. Their bodies faded, ghostly and hollow. They could no longer feel the warmth of sunlight on their skin or the cool breath of the evening air. Food and drink brought no pleasure. The company of others stirred only impatience, even contempt. So they withdrew. They shut themselves within their fortresses, cloaked in shadow, surrounded by silence. And in that silence came paranoia. They saw plots where there were none, enemies behind every door. The obsession with power consumed them, until there was nothing left but fear, and the will to dominate. Honor was discarded, justice forgotten, friendship betrayed. Their minds, fraying under the weight of delusion, could no longer distinguish their own thoughts from the dark whispers of Sauron. In time, one by one, they surrendered entirely. Their spirits shattered, their identities lost. Thus the transformation was complete. No longer kings, no longer men. They became the Nazgûl, Ringwraiths, creatures suspended between the world of the living and the realm of shadow. Their forms were now entirely insubstantial, seen only by the elves of the Undying Lands, the mayors such as Sauron and the wizards, or by any who dared wear the One Ring. With their transformation, they became instruments, extensions of Sauron's terrible will. Bound to him utterly, they obeyed without question. And so long as the Dark Lord remained diminished, the Nazgûl were weak. But when he began to rise once more, so did they. Their power returned in full, dark and terrible. And at their head stood the mightiest of them all, the Witch-King of Angmar, a name spoken in dread. His true name, long forgotten, buried beneath centuries of ruin and sorrow. But fragments of his story endure. Whispers, legends, half-remembered truths. He was once a great king, a mighty sorcerer, a man of ambition and unparalleled power. Some say he hailed from the line of Númenóreans, those ancient men who came from the blessed Isle of Númenor, gifted to them by the Vala for their valor in the wars against Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. The Númenóreans were noble and proud, granted long life and wisdom far beyond that of lesser men. But even in Númenor, as in all great realms, there were hearts that turned cold, and minds that wandered down darker paths. In the Second Age, many among the Númenóreans fell under Sauron's shadow. They became known as the Black Númenóreans, men seduced by the lies of the Dark Lord, their souls twisted by greed and the lust for dominion. Among these corrupted few, Sauron saw promise, and in one particular sorcerer, he saw the potential for something far darker. To this man, Sauron offered one of the rings of power, and slowly, over long years, he was transformed. No longer a king of men, no longer himself. His name was lost, his will erased. He became the Witch-King of Angmar, Lord of the Nazgûl, and the most feared of all Sauron's servants. He would become the hand of vengeance against the Dunedain, the faithful descendants of Númenor who had escaped its fall and helped bring Sauron low in the War of the Last Alliance. To destroy them, he looked north. But before we speak of conquest, let us pause to consider what the Witch-King had become. His appearance was a nightmare-given form, cloaked in robes of shadow, his crown suspended above a head that no longer existed. A mockery of the royal power he once held. A symbol of sovereignty, now corrupted by the will of Sauron. His presence alone was enough to unmake courage. Armies faltered at the sound of his voice. And at his side, he bore weapons as cursed as the soul who wielded them. Foremost was the Morgul blade, a dark dagger that did not kill, but poisoned. To be struck by it was to be condemned. The shard would burrow through flesh, inching toward the heart, turning the victim slowly into a wraith, bound to the will of the Witch-King. It was this very blade that wounded Frodo upon Weathertop, a wound so foul it required the healing hands of Elrond himself to save the hobbit from fading into shadow. There was also the Black Breath, a foul miasma exhaled by the Nazgûl, draining hope and strength from those nearby. A mere breath could send the living into a cold, dark sleep from which some never woke. The 9 rode black horses, unnatural beasts twisted by dark sorcery. They were swift, tireless, and fearless. But in the War of the Ring, these steeds were swept away by flood. In their place, Sauron gave his wraiths new mounts, terrible flying creatures called fell beasts, or black wings. These were monsters from an older world, perhaps remnants of the elder days. Fed on corrupted flesh, they were bred to inspire terror, their screams tearing through the skies of Middle-earth. But let us now return to the cold north, and to the foundation of the Witch-King's dread domain. In the ancient days, the northern lands of Middle-earth, Arnor and its provinces, had once flourished. Founded by Elendil the Tall and his sons after the fall of Númenor, Arnor was a realm of rivers and forests, mountains and memory. A land of beauty, of lineage, of hope. But time wore it down. Internal divisions splintered the once mighty kingdom into 3, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. Pride and distrust festered. The strength of the Dunedain waned. And with it, their unity. The Witch-Kings saw their weakness, and seized upon it. Far to the north of these sundered lands, beyond the Edendales and the high passes of the misty mountains, lay a desolate region, Angmar. Bitter winds scoured its plains. Its hills were barren and lifeless. Few dared enter. Fewer still returned. And it was here, in this bleak and forsaken place, that the Witch-King built his kingdom. Angmar became his fortress. A land of frost and malice, concealed from the vigilant eyes of elves and Dunedain, yet perfectly poised to strike. From this hidden stronghold, he would marshal the forces of darkness, rally the outcasts and the corrupted, and wage war upon the fractured remnants of the north. And so, from shadow, the storm began to gather. From the jagged peaks and shadowed passes, orcs and trolls began to descend. Wargs and wolves roamed out from the wilds. And from the corners of Middle-earth, men whose hearts had long fallen to shadow answered a dark call. They came to Angmar, drawn by whispers of power, eager to serve the most feared of Sauron's servants. There, in the far western mountains, the Witch-King established his seat of power, Carn Dûm. A fortress of dread, carved into stone and shadow, surrounded by high walls and deep chasms. Few roads led to its gates, and none were welcoming. Within, dark sorcerers and generals conspired, and armies gathered, preparing to sweep across the northern realms. The Witch-King ruled Carn Dûm with unyielding cruelty. His power reached across the mountains, warping the land beneath his will. Storm clouds lingered overhead. The very air was foul, choked with the stench of rot and death. The natural world twisted into mockery, reshaped by his dark enchantments. But his war against the northern kingdoms was no swift conquest. It was a slow, merciless campaign that stretched across centuries. He did not seek to merely conquer. He sought to annihilate, to erase the Dunedain of Arnor from memory, to snuff out the light of Númenor in the north. His first target was Rhudaur, the weakest of the 3 sundered realms. The line of the Dunedain there had long perished, leaving lesser lords to squabble for power. The Witch-King placed a puppet on the throne, secured the land with his own forces, and planted the seeds of decay. With Rhudaur under his dominion, he turned next to Cardolan. Though stronger than its sister realm, Cardolan had been ravaged by war and plague. Into its courts the Witch-King sent agents, spies and whisperers, spreading lies, sowing mistrust. The land weakened, morale crumbled, and resistance grew thin. His sorcery darkened the hills. Wights haunted the barrows, spirits of the dead corrupted and cursed, driving the living mad with despair. In time, Cardolan too was laid waste. Its cities fell to ruin. Its towers became graves. Now, only one kingdom remained. Arthedain, the last bastion of Númenorian strength in the north. A realm ruled by the line of Isildur, the same Isildur who once cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand. They had resisted longest. They had held the line. But now they stood alone. The Witch-King gathered his legions in Carn Dûm. His army, vast and terrible, marched south, a tide of darkness aimed at Arthedain's heart. The final blow came in the year 1974 of the Third Age, at the Battle of Fernast. Fernast, city of ancient pride and radiant power, was a jewel of Númenorian craft. But the Witch-King knew that if Fernast fell, the light of Arna would be extinguished forever. Clad in black armor, his form veiled in shadow, the Witch-King led the charge. The Dúnedain fought with valor, but they were outmatched, outnumbered and overwhelmed. One by one, the gates of Fernast fell. The city was breached. The darkness flooded in. And with its fall, the northern kingdom was no more. The Witch-King had triumphed. The once proud realm of Arna lay broken. Its people scattered. Its lands cloaked in silence. The flame of Númenor had been extinguished in the north. But the Witch-King's triumph would not endure. Even as darkness settled, hope remained. Scattered and hunted, the remnants of the Dúnedain fled to forests and hidden valleys. From the ruins, a silent resistance began to stir. Elves from Lindon and Rivendell came to their aid. And from the south, a new light would rise. But Gondor had not forgotten its kinship with the north. In the year following the fall of Fernast, a great host marched from the south, valiant men led by Prince Erner, heir to the throne of Gondor. Upon the windswept plains near the ruined city, they met the armies of the Witch-King in a battle terrible and bitter. The field ran red with the blood of orcs and men, but the courage of the free peoples did not falter. With wisdom and cunning, Erner sent a swift cavalry force into the hills of Evendim. There they lay in wait, hidden from view. And when the battle raged at its peak, the horsemen descended like thunder from the heights, striking the enemy's flank with the fury of a storm unleashed. The ranks of Angmar fell into chaos. Amid the slaughter, the Witch-King sought to retreat north, fleeing toward his stronghold of Carn Dûm. But from Rivendell came Glorfindel, ancient elf lord, undiminished by time, leading a host of elven warriors. They fell upon the retreating foe with righteous fury. Then, through the mists of war, the Witch-King appeared. Dark and terrible, mounted upon a black steed, he rode against Erner. So fearsome was his presence that the prince's horse reared in terror, bearing its rider away against his will. The Witch-King laughed, a sound cold and cruel. But his triumph was short-lived. Glorfindel advanced, radiant and terrible, on a white horse of fire and grace. The elf lord's power shone like the dawn, and the Witch-King, sensing his doom, turned and vanished into the shadows. None saw where he fled. Erner, burning with pride, wished to pursue, but Glorfindel stayed his hand. And in that moment he spoke the words that would become prophecy. Do not pursue him. He will not return to these lands. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man shall he fall. Thus ended the reign of Angmar. The north was free, but scarred and desolate. The great kingdoms of old did not rise again. The Dúnedain became wanderers, keeping secret watch over the lands they once ruled. The elves mourned their losses, but found solace in the shadow lifted. As for the Witch-King, he fled to Mordor. There, in the land of shadow, he rejoined his brethren. Sauron still concealed himself in Dol Guldur, known only as the Necromancer. But the 9 Ringwraiths gathered again, laboring to rebuild their master's strength. In secret, They mustered hosts of orcs and fell creatures, preparing for the day when darkness would rise anew. And rise it did. In the year 2000 of the Third Age, the Ringwraiths emerged from Mordor, black banners unfurling beneath the ashen sky. Their target, Gondor. The kingdom had been weakened by plague and invasion. The Witch-King led the assault, laying siege to the fortified city of Minas Ithil. For 2 long years, the battle raged. And at last the city fell. The Nazgûl claimed it as their own. From that day forward, it was known as Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. A place of shadows and whispers, steeped in ancient evil. Time passed. And the Witch-King's old adversary, Ernir, ascended the throne of Gondor upon the death of his father, King Ernil. Ever vengeful, the Witch-King sent forth a challenge, single combat, in the shadow of Minas Morgul. But Ernir, wary of deception, refused. 7 years later, the challenge came again. This time, Ernir accepted. Pride and old anger burned within him. He rode from Minas Tirith and passed into the Vale of Morgul. He was never seen again. Thus the line of kings of Gondor was broken, and the rule of the stewards began, a time of silence and waiting, a time of watchfulness beneath a darkening sky. Having claimed yet another dark triumph, the Witch-King withdrew to his stronghold, Minas Morgul. In time, even Sauron, still hidden under the guise of the necromancer, fled Dol Guldur to avoid the scrutiny of Gandalf the Grey. He vanished into the east. And so, the Nazgûl waited. Silent, watchful, a lingering threat that brooded in the Tower of Sorcery for nearly 400 years. Then, in the year 2951 of the Third Age, Sauron cast off all disguise. He declared himself openly, and turned his gaze toward the One Ring, the source of his dominion. So began the hunt. The 9, relentless as death, rode forth once more across the wide lands of Middle-earth. The War of the Ring would be their final chapter. It was during this time that Gollum, a creature twisted by centuries under the ring's influence, was captured. Through torment and sorcery, Sauron drew from him the tale of how the ring had passed into his hands, and how it had been lost. But Gollum's words misled him. Sauron believed the ring lay hidden near the Gladden Fields, where Gollum had once dwelled. He dispatched the Nazgûl, led by the Witch-King, to scour the wilderness of Arnor. Camul, the second of the 9, swept through the valleys of Anduin, but the land known as the Shire escaped his notice. Undeterred, the Witch-King pressed westward. Yet Sauron's gaze was soon diverted by trouble in Gondor, and by the betrayal of Saruman, who secretly sought the ring for himself. The Ringwraiths turned to Isengard. There Saruman spun lies with silken ease, convincing them that Gandalf alone knew the ring's whereabouts. And so the hunt resumed. The Witch-King and his host encountered Wormtongue, the traitorous advisor of Rohan, who spoke of Gandalf's passage through the Shire, and of Saruman's treachery. His life was spared. For the Witch-King, peering into fate, foresaw that Saruman's doom would come by this wretched man's hand. Soon after, the Nazgûl captured Saruman's spies and uncovered maps of the Shire. Their hope was rekindled. At Sarn Ford, they met the Dunedain Rangers, guardians of the North, led by Aragorn. Brave and steadfast, they held the line, but the power of the Nazgûl proved too great. Few escaped to bear warning. By then, the One Ring had already passed to Frodo Baggins, a humble hobbit of the Shire. A servant of Saruman, now in the service of the Witch-King, reported a strange sight, a hobbit vanishing within a tavern. The hunt narrowed. The Witch-King pursued Frodo to Weathertop, and there struck him with a Morgul blade. The wound was deep, designed not to kill, but to claim. Yet Aragorn, with fire and fury, drove the Ringwraiths back. Their pursuit continued to Rivendell, where they were finally swept away by the floodwaters of the Brunnen, summoned by Elrond and sealed by elven magic. Defeated, but not destroyed, the Witch-King returned to Mordor. There he prepared for the final war. From Minas Morgul, he led his legions once more, this time against Gondor. His armies shattered the gates of Minas Tirith. But there stood Gandalf upon Shadowfax, a beacon of defiance in the gathering dark. The Witch-King entered the fray upon his monstrous fell beast, and with a single blow, he felled King Theoden of Rohan. Yet prophecy had long awaited him. Eowyn, the king's niece, disguised as a soldier, faced the Black Captain. And when he mocked her, declaring no man could slay him, she cast aside her helm. "I am no man!" And with the aid of Merry Brandybuck, she drove her blade into the wraith's unseen form. The Witch-King of Angmar, the greatest of Sauron's servants, the lord of the Nazgûl, was destroyed. His shriek split the skies. His form withered, and his shadow passed. The tide of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields turned, and with it, the fate of Middle-earth. The downfall of Sauron had begun.